everybody. Hello.
Oh, happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday,
Happy Friday.
everyone. Fawn and Donnie here at the Make a Difference headquarters. And thank you for joining our AMA today. We have all three of our managing directors with us. We have Walt Teeter, who is our energy specialist. We have George Wentz, our legal expert, and Mad Visionary, and Steve Youngdahl, who is our business expert, our camp director, the glue holding everything together and keeping everything running.
Full attendance today for the managing directors. Way to go, gentlemen.
Yes, an applause for the directors. So today's topic is on wind and solar, and it's actually talking about how they're not the answer to our green energy solutions.
Right.
So, directors, do you mind?
I'll kick it off.
Everybody a little bit more on wind and solar.
Well, Fawn and Donnie, thanks for having us. As always, just to kind of kick things off, I think everybody is in love with the concept that you can harvest energy directly from nature and without burning something. And that's awesome. But I think really we need to be very careful about doing a thorough analysis of each aspect of these types of energy harvesting techniques to do a deeper dive and find out, how green are they? Are there any pitfalls? What are the pluses? What are the minuses? And it just take a real, hard, truthful look at all the different types. And having said that, there's some terrific technologies out there. But if you kind of stop at just the one part that you really love about it, you might not see, all the details that are kind of behind the facade, so to speak. And I'm not, as we point some of these out, I'm not going to disparage anything because we may use any or all of these in the future. It depends on the application and it depends on the needs of what the project or the customer dictates. So, having said all of that, I think maybe we'll kick it off. Just kind of go through, one by one. And what do you think, George? Can we start with like wind, for example? That's been around a long time. Heck, they had windmills, hundreds of years ago. So the wind, power that's been harnessed from wind has been around a long time. And so we've had a time to take a really good look at it. As it gets more sophisticated, it also ushers in additional problems, with these monstrous wind turbines. The blades are the size of the length of a football field. They're made of these composite materials that are, up to this point in time, they're just virtually impossible to recycle. Now, we've seen just the leading edge of that right now, but the problem is that there's been many more that have been built, and as those blades retire, and we don't have a recycling program that's able to deal with it, we're just going to be burying more blades in the desert, and I don't really see that as an acceptable method of recycling. So, George or Walt, you guys want to add anything into?
Well, and I think, Steve, that's really coming into the fore lately. So, for example, this year in Germany, you're going to have more wind turbines retired than are built. And so it is something that I want to look at as a treadmill to be able to keep up with retirements. Essentially, the wind turbines have a relatively specific lifespan. And so once they get beyond 15 to 20 years, maintenance becomes so high it doesn't justify keeping them in service. And so we're seeing that first wave of retirement come about. And as you said, it is a disposal problem. Typically, dumping them in the deserts is really not a long-term solution. So that's one of the balancing acts that we have is making sure that whatever projects, whatever technologies that we're focused on, we look at the life cycle impact of what we're doing.
Right. So then, Walt, something that you specifically can speak to, because all sources of energy are headed for the grid. Some are complementary or help stabilize the grid. Some are more erratic and pose, certain problems. But can you speak to that specific point?
Sure. So the concept is called dispatchable or reliable. So, for example, a windmill is a great example, or a solar panel. A windmill produces when wind's blowing. As we saw in Texas and seen in California and in Germany, the wind doesn't blow all the time. And so that with those sort of non-dispatchable or intermittent assets, they work sometimes, they don't work other times. Those sort of intermittent resources put additional stress on the balance of the grid. And so this is on the electricity only. On other forms of energy, such as transportation fuels, other than using a sailboat, which has gone out of vogue for the last 100 years or so, they're really not direct substitutes. And so we do have to figure out the best way to go about regulating and really incentivizing dispatchable. And that's one of MAD's focuses is looking at how do we structure power transactions and other transactions so that we're not making the grid less stable, we're making it more stable.
Okay. So what goes along with that conversation, I hear this thrown out a lot. Maybe you can put a little color on this one. But where does this fit in the discussion with what's called baseload power?
Well, so baseload power would be exactly that, what it sounds like. Very reliable. It forms the basis for the grid. It keeps it stable. So it's not just getting energy across. It's if you think about it, our grid in the US or the grid in Europe or Asia, it goes up and down 60 times a second. And so it's within that second, it has to be stable. If it's not, the grid fails. And so you can't balance it very easily without having resources tied into the grid. And so that's really the challenge is as we have the introduction of additional non-dispatchable renewables into the power grid, how to keep it stable. So batteries are used, they're one solution, but they're a relatively short-term solution. And so a lithium ion battery might work from 1 to 4 hours, some of the sodium sulfur or zinc, maybe 6 or 8 hours. But that's a short-term solution if you've got a weather event. So let's say you had a big snowstorm on your solar panels, or a big cold front came through and the wind died, like what happened in Texas. You had extremely cold temperatures and a lack of wind. The wind generation dropped down to 2 to 3% of normal output. And so you had a multi-day event. And that's one of the real challenges is trying to plan ahead and being able to introduce technologies that enhance the stability of the power grid rather than are detrimental toward it.
Well, that's a great, thank you very much for that. That's a super explanation. George, did you want to add anything?
Well, when you talk about looking at the lifespan of technologies like windmills and things of that nature, one of the things that I think would be helpful to evaluate when you're trying to find the best solution to the problem is the entire carbon footprint of the production of that technology from the beginning to its recycling. So for example, we often think, and solar panels are great because they do produce carbon-free electricity. So that's a great thing. But we often don't evaluate the carbon footprint of the production of those solar panels, because there's a great deal of mining that goes into producing the rare earth minerals that it takes to produce a solar panel. So oftentimes we look at just a piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. And what I think if we're going to solve the problem that we're facing, what we're dedicated to solving here is we have to look at the entire lifespan of the production cycle of each technology and compare it. And we're advocating for a carbon index that would give the information in in an easily understandable number, how many metric tons of carbon or how many tons of carbon go into the production of this particular type of device, right? So if we took into account when we look at, for example, electric cars, which we're good on electric cars, that's a solution to a problem. We're looking for carbon-free transportation solutions, but there's a tremendous amount of copper in current electric motors. That copper is mined. Mining that copper is done with massive diesel-powered mining trucks, not taking into consideration the carbon put into the atmosphere from those trucks. You're just taking a piece of the puzzle. You're not looking at the whole puzzle. So one of the interesting technologies that we're evaluating and working on right now is sort of a redesign of the electric motor, which reduces the amount of copper required, reduces the amount of mining required. And that may not sound like a big deal, but when you multiply that by every single electric motor out there in every single electric vehicle, it becomes a huge problem that all of that copper is being produced, refined, smelted, every single thing with carbon-based fuels that are putting a tremendous amount of carbon into the atmosphere. So I'm just saying that we need to take all of it into consideration if we're really going to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are coming in. If we're going to take what is the current trend, which is this, and we're going to make it go this, then we have to look at the whole picture, not just part of the picture.
And I think that's right, George, is what we need to look at is the entire chain of the value chain. So in essence, we're trying to accomplish something. Let's say it's to run your air conditioner at your house or to power your electric car. It's every step of the way. It's minimizing the inefficiencies in the system. And obviously, if you're more efficient in how you're consuming, you don't have to produce as much. So it's a virtuous cycle along the entire value chain as we improve the various segments of the value chain, whether it's new control technology, better data processing. One of the groups we're working with now, we're looking at, it's a 40% reduction in the consumption for data centers. Data centers are huge and they're growing. They're not going anywhere. If anything, that's one of the fastest growing industries in the world and one of the largest consumers of electricity. So making material improvements in data handling and storage is a monumental advancement. We're looking at one facility right now where we're looking at a zero carbon supply of power into a more efficient storage and processing system. That's very much a core of our mandate is making people's lives better. And in this case, might not even notice it, but it makes the environment better for decades to come.
So what we're looking at is we're looking at the front end in terms of the production of the technology. We're looking at the back end in terms of what it uses. We're trying to get more energy production, and we're trying out of the same amount of effort and the same amount of, just call it pollution that you generate. There's going to be some form of pollution generated in creating anything. And so what we want to do is for every unit of that type of thing that goes into the atmosphere, we want to maximize the electrical production that comes out of it, right? So if we're going to have a recognized something that is not what we want, but is a necessary evil, we want to maximize the productivity of it. And then on the other side, we want to increase the efficiency of the use of that. So we want to do it better on the front end. We want to do it better on the back end. We've got to have both of those solutions at the same time.
Yeah, we
think-
actually have our first question here from Long Live Hex. They're asking, so this carbon index would essentially prove what energy solutions are best, revealing the fact that wind and solar isn't that great. Does someone want to answer that for Long Live Hex?
Sure. I think the carbon intensity index approach to evaluating energy production, transportation, and consumption is the right approach. Previously, there had been something of a color-coded system, but it was really not an accurate reflection of the inputs and outputs. It was really just hanging a tag on something. And so by having a carbon intensity score, it very clearly identifies, for example, grams per kilowatt hour required to achieve a certain outcome, a certain goal, certain production of energy, whether it's electricity or fuels, et cetera. So the carbon intensity index will help us benchmark much more accurately the impacts of the various activities along the value chain.
And with regard to wind and solar, we're not anti-wind and solar because they fit in certain solutions. They solve certain problems. It's just that you have to be realistic that wind and solar alone, without a whole lot more, is not going to solve the problem. We don't want to be in a position where we are relying for life-sustaining electricity, on wind and solar. So, for example, if you're in Phoenix, you may have an assisted living facility or a senior citizen center in Phoenix, and it could be 120 degrees outside. Those senior citizens are actually not going to make it at 120 degrees. Electricity is required. It's a life-sustaining thing. So we have to realize that as we introduce renewables, which are wonderful and we want to introduce them, we also want to make sure that we do it in an ethical and life-sustaining manner. We can't take portions of our society who are dependent upon this and put them at risk by putting in a system that at the end of the day doesn't actually work. We've seen California have to send out tweets in LA by the mayor saying, citizens, it's 4:00 in the afternoon, turn off your major appliances. This is not really an optimal solution for the provision of electricity. And so we're not saying solar and wind is bad. We're saying that solar and wind are not the entire solution to the problem we face. Are they a piece of the puzzle? Yes. Do they fit in certain instances very, very well? Yes. Can they help? Yes. Will we use them where required and where they work? Absolutely. But they're not the entire solution, as many people try to say they are. We've come from the energy industry all our lives, and we just know what works and what doesn't work, and we're very practical people. We've also seen, I lived through Katrina, okay? I have seen what happens when you don't have power. It's life-threatening. There's an ethical obligation as a power provider to provide consistent dispatchable power because people's lives are at stake. I've seen it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question from Long Live Hex. He would love to hear some examples from the directors, how much consumers will save by using MADS solutions.
And I think I'd like to sort of preface that with a bit of a continuation of George's point. So not only is the provision of energy vital, the provision of affordable energy is vital. So even in the developed world here, we have the concept of energy poverty. One needs to look no further than the impacts that some of these changes have had, for example, on the German electricity market, where the retail power prices are well over 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, that really has an impact on low-income parties. You see discussions in the UK over energy poverty for pensioners. So it's not just the provision of reliable power, it's the provision of reliable power that's economical. And so what we're targeting is, as we introduced solutions, we look to improve the situation. So obviously, if we're able to have substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we're also looking in parallel to do that in an economical way. Some of the technologies are almost a straight up savings on consumption. So in the example I gave, if the data center consumes 40% less electricity, accomplishes the same end result, and does so at a comparable capital level, essentially that's a savings to the operator of that data center, which always eventually, due to market forces, gets passed on to consumers. And so we look at most of these benefits ultimately will flow through to the consumers as these technologies are rolled out and become commercialized or more widely commercialized in many cases.
It's interesting because the people are going to be the solution to the problem, by us reaching out and creating the avenue for them to get involved. But they'll also be the beneficiaries of the projects and the clean energy projects that we're rolling out because we are going to provide market-based solutions, which means that our solutions have to be affordable to the people who can buy them. And so we have all of those things in our business model as we approach solving the problem of greenhouse gas emissions. It's not super simple. We've spent a lot of time and effort before we went live developing our program. So we've taken into consideration all of these issues, which is why we love talking about them.
Absolutely, and we appreciate you gentlemen being here and with all of our viewers answering all these questions, going into things in more detail. And one request for Steve and Walt, we're getting, people are letting us know that we have feedback coming in when other people are speaking. So if you're able to mute yourselves on your end while Walt or myself are speaking, that would be fantastic. I think that would be really helpful. Did anyone else have any other questions on our wind and solar and what we have going on here? Any questions for the directors? And then, yeah, directors, did you have anything that you wanted to add to what you have already explained?
Well, I think this is maybe a further example. We're very closely developing and looking at hybrid solutions, both grid connected and off-grid solutions. And so therefore, especially in areas of the world where, for example, you don't have good transmission lines, installing a standalone system that might involve non-dispatchable renewables, some level of battery, and some level of backup gas generation, gas being the lowest environmental impact of any of the fossil fuels, we can create an improvement in lives again, because obviously non-dispatchable renewables have some good traits as far as in isolated markets providing economical energy. Obviously batteries provide some of that bridging. And then when needed, obviously the most expensive energy is the energy you don't have, or the cost of unserved energy. And so by putting in place a hybrid solution, we enable low operating costs in general with high reliability. So we create a system whereby in areas, especially where you have grid instability, creating a microgrid that has that reliable dispatchable power that businesses, homes, commercial establishments need. One of the things that's overlooked is if you have unreliable or unstable power grids, not only does it harm your life visibly, the lights go out, etc., but it harms all the electronics that are hooked up to those grids. And so your refrigerators, your computers, everything, your television, the lifespan of those systems goes down because the quality of the power coming in is not high enough. And that's a real cost to citizens, to businesses that suffer that lack of reliable power.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, everything we're doing is about people, is about the quality of life that people have, turning away from the use of heavy fuels that pollute a great deal. That's a quality of life issue. Talking about reliable, dispatchable, dependable electricity, that's a quality of life issue. Clean water flows from that. Air conditioning flows from that. Lights, everything you have, refrigeration, all comes from that. You can't have really a high quality of life without the kind of power that we're talking about providing. And so we're anxious to solve this problem, and that's what we're all about here. I think if we don't have any other questions, that would kind of.
We do have one more
Here we
here
are.
from Long Live Hex, and it's, what is the world going to look like in 20 years if MAD succeeds?
Well, my goodness. Let me take you on a stroll through the future. We have a vision. We really do. So first of all, I'm not sure it's going to take 20 years. And second of all, I'm going to take the word if out, because we're going to do this. We are really dedicated to making this happen. But I love the question. So the kinds of things that we're working on right now are based on long proven technology that solve existing problems and generate returns to our investors through us solving those problems. But we've sort of made a base, right? We're moving the ball down the field towards cleaner energy using existing technology. And that's a very low risk enterprise because we know we can do it. We know that if we have fresh water and electricity like we have at our little hydro dams, we know that we can introduce certain types of equipment and we can create green hydrogen. We then know that we can use that green hydrogen in hydrogen fuel cells to create electricity. We can move automobiles with them. We can power homes with them. We can decentralize power. We can get people easily off the grid that way if they would like to be. We can make people, individual families, energy independent, which we really think is cool. We could use that technology to set up mining operations for people that are into crypto. Standalone, consistent, solid energy created by a hydrogen fuel cell to power that, right? With green hydrogen created from nothing but hydroelectricity, fresh water, and equipment. So that's something that we are going to be doing. And but we also have some really cool technology that we're very familiar with, that we're working with, that we hope to bring on, which is like our wireless electricity transmission, which means that we could, with this, just imagine getting into a quadricopter that is electrically driven by electricity that is delivered to that quadricopter through the air. And imagine that the data necessary to guide that quadricopter is also there. And you have your handy dandy smartphone. And so what you do is you call up your mobile app for maps, right? Google Maps, and you enter in where you want to go. Then the quadricopter lifts off into the air and autonomously guides you to wherever it is you just put in, using wirelessly delivered electricity in real time to that quadricopter to get you there, knowing where all the other quadricopters in the air are, just like autonomous vehicles do on the ground today, but we're doing this in the air. All of this, we have the tech for under that we are working with now. We don't have that tech deployed. We're working on deploying that tech. That's a pit of the future. Just imagine if all of that electricity that was powering that quadricopter wirelessly was generated by geothermal, carbon-free geothermal at the hottest rocks in the United States, then taking that geothermally created electricity, delivering it wirelessly to your quadricopter. That's a pretty cool future.
Yeah, that's
You know,
fantastic.
And the whole thing is carbon free. Can we get there? Absolutely, we can get there. We know how to do that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a very extremely different.
Will we stub our toe along the way before we get there? Of course we will, you know. But we know how we know, and we are working with groups that share that vision, and that's the kind of future that we see. That's a clean, green future that allows power to be delivered wirelessly to every corner of the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a bad future, right? We've solved the transportation problem, and we've solved the energy production problem and the energy transmission problem, and we've done so with no carbon. That's pretty cool.
Oh, agreed. And we got one more question from Matt here.
Yeah, Matt McDonald's asking, does MAD have a waste to energy solution? Because with the global population booming right now, he sees waste as one of the greatest concerns, if not the greatest concern of our time.
I would say here, we have several that we're working on. Everything from disposal of plastics to the ability to treat industrial waste products and create valuable carbon-free solutions from those waste products. So yes, we are quite focused on, let's call it the trash problem. Obviously, as we've talked about, either you have to produce less if you consume less, but also the more you're able to use products that otherwise would be wasted or go into for example, a trash dump, or worse yet, go into the rivers and oceans. We really view that as a key component of proper stewardship of the environment. Likewise, if we could take a product that right now is an industrial problem and turn it into the cleanest fuel on the planet, well, that's right in our mission. It's profitable, and it, for lack of a better term, kind of addresses two issues at the same time. It reduces the waste stream and then turns that waste stream into a valuable feedstock and energy stream.
Thank you, Walt. That was a great answer.
It almost sounds fictional, doesn't it? The fact that, the waste to energy project.
Yeah, well, a lot of what we're doing here at MAD, it's so forward thinking and futuristic, which is one of the million things that I think is so fantastic.
What would you guys say to people that maybe are that skeptical of it, if they think, you know what, you're definitely just blowing smoke right now, there's no way that these things are actually possible? What would you say to people that maybe have a great deal of doubt in the projects that we're tackling, especially something like waste to energy?
Well, we're actively looking at a project right now along exactly the lines I described, where we're taking a waste stream, or we will take a waste stream. We'll look to split it up and refine it to capture the CO2 that comes off of that waste stream and to sequester it. So at the same time, having a valuable fuel that's produced. So that is available with some current technology, just sort of putting the technology Lego blocks together in a little different manner than has been done before. But that's our ability to integrate existing solutions to create a better outcome, while at the same time we are actively developing evolutionary as well as revolutionary technologies to advance the ability to have an even greater impact on the GHG emissions, while at the same time always focused on economics and making sure that we're not harming the consumer, that we're helping the consumer.
George, Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
I think we're in pretty good shape, and if there's no more questions for us, we can get back to work and start moving the ball down the field again.
Science is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up this AMA session. Thanks to everyone that tuned in for joining. Managing directors, thank you all for taking the time to join us. And now back to your caves to begin saving the world as you were.
We return to our previous program.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great rest of your Friday. Woo!